Hey everyone, welcome to the 2020 College Summit Speaker Series. I'm Nnamdi Asomugha.
And I'm Allison Felix, and we couldn't be more excited to share this wonderful event with you. This year has been extremely difficult for everyone. We have all experienced an interruption to our daily lives and routines, and so many have lost loved ones and are experiencing hardship in many different forms. In my own life, I was preparing for the Olympic Games, and I learned that it would not be happening. I had to completely shift my mind and figure out how to move forward. Your education has been disrupted, and you guys have all had to figure out how to navigate attending school virtually. You've missed out on important events, sports, seeing friends, and a lot more. Thinking about college and the application process might be another area that's stressing you out. Well, we wanted to help you with that, and that's why we're here today.
So this year, as you guys know, we brought our annual College Summit to you. Our format this year is a virtual speaker series. So every weekend for the next 4 weeks, we'll bring in some of the top minds in the country to speak with you all on topics such as choosing the right school while in a pandemic, tips and secrets about the admissions process, how to graduate college debt-free.
In today's session, we'll detail how to write a great college essay. Our speaker is Arun Ponnusamy, who is the Chief Academic Officer at CollegeWise. He has admissions experience from 3 highly selective universities, UCLA, Caltech, and University of Chicago, which is also his alma mater. And he's guided hundreds of students on their journey to college. He's read and evaluated thousands of college essays. So we are so grateful to have him here today to share with us.
And just a quick reminder for you guys, any questions that you have during the session, please be sure to write them in the chat box and we'll try to get to them during the Q&A portion at the end. But that's it from us. We're going to turn it over to Arun so he can tell you guys how to write a great college essay. Have a great session.
All right. Thank you, Nnamdi and Allison. And I'm going to assure the rest of you now that we're in a place where it is, I just have one more kind of technical thing to do to get us up and running. So give me just a quick moment and hopefully you can all see this slideshow. Give me a moment here. And that'll be the last transition we've got. All right, well, I'm hoping at this point, all of you are seeing a screen that says how to write great college essays. If for some reason you're not seeing that, go ahead and let me and my colleagues who are in the chat box know. As Nnamdi noted, there is a chat box there, which you should feel free if you've got friends who are on this morning's call and you want to say hello to them, feel free to use it for that. We also have an entire Q&A section. So you may notice that along the menu, there's a Q&A bar. So I would love for you to all use that section liberally as you have questions. My focus today is going to be on writing a great college essay, but as Allison noted, I have deep experience both as a college counselor as well as an admissions officer. And I'm going to encourage you to, feel free to ask other questions, particularly in our Q&A section. So feel free along the way if you've got questions or want clarification about what's going on that I'm talking about. And then certainly, like I said, at the end, we'll save some time for those of you who have more specific questions taking place. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. Allison already noted, I started off in the world of college admissions at my alma mater, the University of Chicago. I ended up then working at Caltech as an admissions officer. So part of my job there was to read applications, decide who's admitted, who's not admitted, who gets a full ride scholarship. I ended up reading and evaluating applications at Allison's rival university, UCLA, and I guess a rival of sorts to Nnamdi's alma mater, Berkeley. And for the last 15 years, I've been at CollegeWise, where I have been a college counselor at CollegeWise. And we are actually the largest college counseling company in the country, and we create all sorts of resources and information to help kids through the college application process. I have spoken with the folks who are running today, and Antoinette and Zainab are going to make sure that you get access to a lot of these free resources we have. So make sure you check your mail early next week, because we've got some amazing things out there that will help you, not just with writing a great essay, but building your college list, being prepared for an interview, figuring out all those bits and pieces of the financial aid and, scholarship process. I'm proud to say that, CollegeWise, we work with Michelle Obama's Reach Higher initiative, which works to help first generation low income students on their journey to college. We also work with the College Football Playoff Foundation. This year, it seems like it was a lifetime ago, but I was in New Orleans for the National College Football Championship, where during halftime, we actually recognized the Excellence in College Counseling Award to a local New Orleans public school counselor. And so we've been doing this work for a long time. And, as it was noted in introduction, I've been doing this work for a long time. And so I've been reading lots of applications, working with kids on essays. And that's the information that I'm coming to all of you with today. So the first thing I want to highlight is the fact that this process does not need to be stressful. And some of you who, may have had older siblings or had older friends who are like freaking out about bits and pieces of the process, totally understand that it can create anxiety and provoke all sorts of like negative feelings, but it doesn't have to, particularly if you, listen to the advice of experts like myself, the experts Nnamdi mentioned we're going to be coming on in the coming weeks. And I think you can actually go about it in a relaxed way and maybe even have a little bit of fun, as hard as that might be to imagine. So I do want to start off with, some of you who are watching maybe in a place where you're like, it's so crazy right now with how all the steps I have to take to apply to college and how expensive it can be. And I'm concerned about how we'd afford it. Does college even make sense? Oh my gosh, yes, it does. So this is data from Georgetown University that highlights the fact that if you have a high school diploma, you're effectively making a college diploma, a bachelor's degree, you're making twice as much as you would if you simply have a high school diploma. So $36,000 a year if you graduate from high school, $62,000 a year if you go on to get your bachelor's degree. And to go a level higher, for some of you who want to go out there and become a nurse, become a teacher, become a doctor, you can see your income goes up to $80,000 as a median income. So many people are making a lot more than even that. So there's huge value just financially. Here's another way to kind of look at it, particularly depending on what you end up majoring in. Those of you who love math, science, tech type stuff, you can see you do pretty well, right? If you look at that middle point of 3,600, if you look at those majors to the left, those students end up in, careers that pay pretty well. But again, even for those students who don't end up in those majors, look, even in the arts, education, humanities, liberal arts, you're still making way more than you would as simply a high school student. And the other thing that I'll add is it's not just about money. All the data and research out there shows that college graduates are physically healthier people. It also shows that they build stronger ties with their community, their families, their friends. And some data out there shows that college graduates are also happier people. And I think all of us know that we probably love to be a little bit happier when we can be. And so again, it's not just like hippy dippy feelings telling me this. It's actual research being done by like social scientists out there measuring these things. So just understand that college is still an incredibly powerful tool to have in your tool belt as you go out and figure out your future. So the next thing I want to highlight, I mentioned that I worked at several universities, and I really want to highlight the fact that this process, you hear so much about like GPAs and test scores. There are real people who are part of this process. And I want you to understand that the average admissions officer's age, the person who is reviewing applications, their age is 26. They are real people, that 26 is like one of your young favorite teachers. It's one of your older cousins. It is not your grandparents. It is not like, some fuddy-duddy person at your church or temple or whatever the case might be. These are people who, at 26, they're just 9 years older than you as a high school, senior, and they've gone through the process. And that's the eye through which they're reviewing those applications. And so keep in mind, it's not, I had this idea in high school that, the typical admissions officer was like some again, some old fuddy-duddy guy and like sitting in a library smoking a pipe in judgment of me. That's simply not the case. It's actually like young people who went to the university that they're evaluating applications for, and they're deciding who is admitted and who is not. The other thing that I really want to highlight is the fact that some of you may be, thinking like, I'm attending this session because I hate writing. Like English class, history class, they completely freak me out because I got to do all this like writing and I don't enjoy it. I want to point out the fact that the writing that you'll be doing here in the college admissions process is nothing like what you do in the English class. You will be using the word I, right? This entire process, I had my first boss at the University of Chicago, a dear mentor of mine, Ted O'Neill. He talked about, Arun, this entire process is about good storytelling. And we're looking for the great stories these students have to share. And so I want to remind all of you that, first of all, this isn't like writing for your English class. In fact, some of the best essays I see are not from the students I work with who are like A's and got a 5 on the AP English. There's some of the students who are like C+ students in English, but they love to tell a story. They sometimes love to talk about themselves, and that can be a really great, wonderful thing. And the other thing is, you're all teenagers. Your lives are filled with rich stories, and the college application process is set up in a way for you to share those stories. So if you're a senior who's already kind of dove into this process and you're like, oh, I don't even know what I should start writing about, or that won't be good enough, through the course of this, I'm hoping you'll understand, like, no, I've got like killer stories that I'm ready to share with those admissions officers. Now, I will acknowledge that part of the story, if we talk about the admissions process being good storytelling, part of that story is being told sometimes by test scores, which thankfully this year, because of the pandemic, almost no colleges require them. The UCs have gotten rid of them. USC has gotten rid of them. Most private schools, pretty much all the universities in the United States now, with the exception, if there are any of you tuning in from Florida, the state of Florida is the one state that is still continuing to require an SAT or ACT. The rest of the states, they don't need them. They don't care. They're not expecting them. Of course, part of the story will be told through the courses you took and the grades that you received. And again, some of you are seniors and you're like, I don't have that opportunity to raise my GPA or, really flex on them with my academic record. I want to reassure you that, again, this is only one part of the storytelling. There is a huge part of this admissions process, the way admissions officers like myself used to evaluate applications. And it's about what we call about the social emotional components of the admissions process. And so in discussing that, I could break down social emotional learning into like dozens of little like details. But what I want to really highlight is colleges are looking for evidence of your passion and your curiosity. They're trying to get a sense of like the things that you love and what makes you tick. And if you find stories, whether it's for your personal statement, whether it's for some of the supplemental short essays out there, and you're able to share those through the course of your application, you're going to do perfectly fine. In fact, you're going to do wonderfully over there, as long as you're like open and honest and authentic. And again, I'm going to get into like real specifics as far as that is concerned. So continuing with that social emotional aspect, I want to kind of highlight the fact that, this is actually pulled up from Harvard, where this is what Harvard, the most selective university, kind of along with Stanford, that you've all heard of Harvard and Stanford. This is what they're talking about. We look for, their admissions officers are trained when they evaluate applications to look for humor, sensitivity, grit, leadership, integrity, helpfulness, courage, kindness. No, it's not saying look for a 4.0 GPA. It's not saying look for 5 5s on APs. It's not saying look for president of student government or captain of the soccer team. It's asking for these characteristics right here. All of you, every single one of you who got up in the morning, voluntarily showed up to learn more about college essays, you are someone who has courage. You are someone who is sensitive. You're showing leadership skills alone by kind of standing up for yourselves and saying, I'm going to show up this morning for myself. So again, understand that admissions officers, you might have this idea that it's all about numbers, numbers, numbers. It's not. these are the kinds of things that they're looking for. And I'll have a few examples that I'll be talking about later. And I do see some questions starting to pop up at the Q&A. Keep throwing them in. I'm going to go ahead and with both of these, with the questions that I see coming in right now, I'll weave them in. And if I don't quite nail it, I will we'll talk about it more at the end in Q&A. But thank you. Keep the questions flowing in. So first thing I want to start off with is a quote by one of the most highly regarded admissions officers, and now he's a college counselor, and a man by the name of Park Muth, who worked at the University of Virginia. And he talked about the fact that most of the essays that he read as an admissions officers, they were like Big Macs. They had all these ingredients, they were put together and great. They were technically correct, but they were kind of all the same. And some of you may have known that if you've had you live in LA and you've had the chance to, go out to Michigan, or you live in Florida and you've had the chance to go out to, Chicago, and your friends were like, well, what was it like visiting Chicago? What was it like visiting Michigan? What was it like being in Florida? You would never be like, oh my God, you've got to have the Big Macs. The Big Macs in Michigan and Florida are amazing. That's not the point of a Big Mac. Like, the point of a Big Mac is it's going to be the same no matter what, right? And so with that in mind, just understand that, like, most admissions officers, like when I read essays, they were good, but they weren't the kinds of things that made me go, wow. And so a lot of the advice that I'm going to be sharing today is to help you get past this idea of a McEssay, just writing something where you're like, well, I ran my spell check and I ran my grammar check and I have 5 paragraphs and there's like a thesis here and I've supported it. Good. I'm sending it out the door. I want to push all of you to get past a Big Mac. I want you guys to create something that's like, legit gourmet out there. So I'm sharing here, I'm going to ask each of you I'm going to share 3 essays, and I want you to read each of these essays. And then I want you to imagine what this person might be like as a roommate. And I'm going to ask you kind of at the end to think about, I'm going to share all 3 of them. So go ahead and dive in and take a minute to read this essay by Calvin. I realize because I can't see you all, I'm going to kind of guess that you've read through it, and I'm going to hope. By the way, I'll make sure that you get this PowerPoint. So if any of you want to reference back to some of the details that I'm sharing, don't worry even about taking notes. Feel free to kick back and just enjoy your Saturday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Here's number 2. And then here's number 3. And you guys all have the chat box. I want you to think about, after you've read number 3, if you were an admissions officer and you were a recent graduate of the university, like I worked at the University of Chicago where I attended, I would often read essays thinking about who would I pick as my roommate, right? Assuming they had the grades and everything else, who would I pick as my roommate? Tell me which one of these students you would pick as your roommate. If you don't mind, just throw it into the chat. Would you pick student 1, student 2, or student 3 here, Alex? All right. Come on, I know there's more of you on here. I can see there's a ton of you here. Yeah. So we're seeing a vote, we're seeing a couple votes for, the second student. It's worth noting, no one has voted for student number 1, right? You all aren't even admissions officers, and you can kind of look at this one and go, that's a Big Mac. That's a McEssay, right? Like there's nothing wrong with it. Like you didn't see any spelling errors, and it flows, but it doesn't bring some sort of personality like this one does. And this one really highlights someone who's like getting the job done. And then number 3, who doesn't want to have a roommate who's making you like chocolate chip pancakes, right? And so admissions officers, I want you to understand, think about that storytelling. Likability plays a huge factor in it. They already have a sense if you're strong enough as a student through things like your transcript, the letters of recommendation, the courses you took, your grades. But now it becomes about what would you be like in the student body. So yeah, and I see a great comment there about highlighting family first is important. And absolutely, those are those social emotional components, because you're going to be living in the dorms, you're going to be making friends. All this stuff matters to admissions officers, right? If you kind of were like, I hate people, they'd be a little bit like, maybe you should try online school, because we want you to like live amongst other people and learn from them and impact them and share things about yourself. So again, just a simple exercise kind of showing you. Also, something that we'll talk about shortly, notice like there's more details in the second one, the senior center at 7 in the morning, the reference to the grandmother, Mother's Day breakfast. The second one's talking about worst chocolate chip pancakes. It's not just like I make pancakes, it's I make the worst chocolate chip pancakes, right? And it's not even just like I go to a deli, it's Gus's Deli. This is the stuff as an admissions officer, the sharp descriptive details that when I was reading my 100th essay of the day at 10 o'clock at night in the dead of a Chicago winter, that would make my eyes pop a little bit and go like, yeah, this is the kind of student that I'm a little stoked to admit. So we're going to dive a little bit into these 4 tips. Don't worry that you missed them, because I'm going to kind of go through them one by one. Don't try to impress the admissions officers. Just be honest. And this often comes up, the way I describe it is I would read so many essays. Again, remember, 10 o'clock at night, reading my 100th, sometimes my 250th essay of the day. And it would start with, throughout life, I have faced many challenges and obstacles, and it is only through hard work, perseverance, and diligence that I've been able to overcome them. Ugh, you guys can already tell how annoying that is, right? You're just like, that sounds like kid number 1, not kid number 2 or kid number 3, right? And so that ends up being someone who is trying to impress the admissions officer. And so I want to highlight the fact that your application is playing that the role of whether are you qualified to be here? Will you graduate? Will you succeed? Your essay is more about the like, will you be part of this community? Would you be someone that I want to be a roommate with? And again, I pointed out who the typical admissions officer was, 26 years old, recent graduate of the university. Keep that in mind. You don't have to elevate your language. You don't have to like go to great lengths to, impress the admissions officer, because then you start being a little bit weird, a little bit, fake. There are those essays, it's a little bit like if one of you plays a guitar and, that girl that you like kind of goes, hey, I notice you always have a guitar with you. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And if you were like, well, throughout life, I faced many challenges and that's why I've started to play the guitar. That girl would think you're pretty weird and kind of walk away, right? Versus if you're like, oh, Eddie Van Halen, have you listened to him? He is absolutely amazing. And I've been so inspired by him since I was a kid, blah, blah, blah. There's a difference between being honest and authentic versus just, trying to fake it. So number 1, don't try to impress the admissions officers. Just be honest. Number 2, own your own stories. I pointed that out with essays numbers 2 and 3, where put in detail that no one else would be able to recognize, right? So you can make that essay yours and yours only. And so part of it is, could anyone else tell this story? Do I have enough detail to add? And if you kind of think about it and you're like, gosh, with my church, we did that whole youth group trip down to Mexico where we worked, at a local church. Would all of you have the exact same story? Would you be writing that because you're like, oh, I might be able to impress the admissions officer? Or you, the kid who's like, no, I had this experience and it was so meaningful, and you're able to share the names and, you know, the feelings that you had, then it becomes an interesting essay. If you pick it only because you're like, well, you know, I guess it would be good, that won't make as much sense. And so I'll bring up an example of a student I worked with a few years ago who, you know, many of you probably do some form of volunteer service. At least before Corona times, you were able to do some kind of community service. And I had a student who worked at I live in downtown Los Angeles, and I have a student who worked at a shelter, a homeless shelter not far from here. He volunteered. And to be honest with you, he didn't enjoy it. He was in charge of putting food into these boxes and then giving it to people. And he hated the kind of the assembly line vibe of it. But there was a day where this kid loved photography and he always kept his camera around his neck. And one of the homeless women was like, hey, that's your camera. She's like, would you mind taking some pictures of me? And he was kind of like, what, why? And she's like, well, I was evicted from my home. And in the rush, when we were thrown out of our home, we lost all of our pictures, all of our family portraits. And Christmas is coming up in 2 weeks. And I really want to remember this moment with myself and my children at this age. And he was like, absolutely, let me take some pictures, you know, for you. And from there, he talks about in his essay about how a line of people formed behind this woman asking for the same thing. Will you please document this moment with me and my children so we can remember it in the future? And he just offered detail after detail about the people coming through and how he felt, because he'd always just taken photography of sports and nature. He had never really cared so much about like people, and he realized how powerful photography could be. Woven those details, it took his essay from being one of those essay number 1 that was technically correct to essay number 3, where every college was like, wait, what? He's a student who actually ended up going to Harvard. And a lot of it was based, he got a letter when he got his admissions officer. They're like, we hope you end up becoming a photographer in our community, which I thought was like a really nice testament. Oops, not too fast. Number 3, don't repeat information from the rest of your application. Don't forget, by the time you get to your essays, by the time the admissions officer gets to your essays, they're going to have seen your grades. You know, they're going to have seen which courses you took. You don't need to write about like, these are the 4 AP courses I took my junior year. They're going to have seen which activities that you've been involved with, if you've won any awards, if you are a varsity athlete, if you were most valuable player. All of those details will be in the activities section of your common application. They will have had letters of recommendation, teachers who have talked about how much you love chemistry and how engaged you are in the classroom in history or whatever the case might be. And so if you're in a case where you're like repeating stuff that's already solidly positioned in the rest of your application, well, you don't need to repeat it, right? Now, some of you may have a reason where you're like, yeah, I know my teacher talked about chemistry and yeah, I know I got A's, but I need to tell them why I love chemistry. Awesome. You should absolutely repeat it. And so understand, I'm offering guidelines right here. These are not hard and fast rules. Some of you are smart enough, clever enough where you're going to kind of go, yeah, that tip makes sense. But in my case, there might be an exception. Yes, some of you might have reasons to emphasize things that are elsewhere in your application, and you absolutely should go ahead and include that. But for many of you, if you're kind of like, listen, I'm an awesome volleyball player. Everyone knows that. I was captain. I was MVP of my team. I was first team all league. My coach wrote a letter of recommendation. But your main jam is like, I love baking. I love mountain biking. I want to write an essay about that. That's perfectly fine. Just because you're awesome at volleyball doesn't mean you need to write an essay about it. You can go ahead and let the rest of your application speak to that and instead focus on your love of baking or your love of mountain biking or whatever else it is that you feel like lights you up, you know. And I'll bring that up, you know, as I work with students helping them think about their essays. There is a huge difference. We're talking about essays. I'll see kids' eyes light up. They get excited about something. That to me is often the sign of if you're a little excited. Because if you're a little excited writing it and you enjoy writing it, the admissions officer is going to be a little excited to read it. They're going to enjoy writing it. If you're kind of like, well, I guess I'll write about volleyball, that's the attitude that's going to come through. And that's the attitude with which an admissions officer is going to take that information you share. So keep that in mind as well. And then your essay should sound like you. You know, like I was making those jokes about the students who, you know, use the big words, the kids who use words like, I have a plethora of interests. Really? Don't you have many interests, right? And like, I'm a multifaceted individual. Like, do you really use multifaceted regularly? Like maybe if you're, you know, studying Greek and Latin and, you know, things of that sort, but chances are most of you aren't using words like that, right? If your friends on Monday, you're hopping onto online Zoom school, is like, hey, Anthony, how was your weekend? If you were like, well, as Socrates once said about weekends, like that's not how most teenagers speak, right? So don't all of a sudden feel like you need to bring in that kind of language. As an admissions officer, it drove me insane, you know, where I would read essays, you know, as Martin Luther King once said, as Mahatma Gandhi once said, as John F. Kennedy once said, that doesn't sound like you. Now, if you're regularly that kid, okay, because I see, oh, now you're on the debate team and you love history. Okay, maybe you are the kid who speaks like that. But the vast majority of you aren't speaking like that. So keep that in mind. If it's not something you'd actually say to like your favorite older cousin, to your favorite teacher, don't make that part of your essay, right? Keep this honest and authentic so that you're revealing who you are through it. A few writing tips right here. You know, I mentioned, you know, I kind of mentioned Alex, the kid number one, about the technical stuff. I will tell you that when I was reading, you know, those admissions essays, it was unbelievable to how many students didn't run spell check and grammar check. So please, at a minimum, make sure that you are using spell check and grammar check. As I noted before, think about the words that you're using. You know, I could tell when kids used Microsoft Word and had hit Shift F7 because that brings up the thesaurus, the synonyms function. And you can see where they were just swapping out a simple, perfect, elegant word for something that was really kind of clunky and complex and didn't quite fit, but they thought they might impress someone. They thought they might impress the admissions officer. So stick with the language that you're kind of comfortable with, that you would normally use. And as I noted earlier, don't start your essays with a quote. So diving in a little bit further now, I want to highlight some of the essay topics that I would like for all of you to kind of leave to the side. And I'm going to explain a little bit why. Again, some of you are going to have exceptions to this. And I know particularly with, you know, Allison and Namdi's organization, there are a lot of you are athletes. And I've got that first point right there. Teamwork is learned through sports. That's fine, right? But the truth is teamwork is also learned by being on the school paper. Teamwork is learned as being part of the orchestra. Teamwork is learned through being part of student government. So if you're trying to point out that like, hey, sports taught me about teamwork, just understand that anyone can say that about virtually anything, right? Doesn't mean that you can't write about teamwork. It doesn't mean that you can't write about sports, but it goes back to that original idea of making the story your own. You're going to have to bring in the sharp descriptive details that make that story yours and yours only. But those essays, and I would read these as an admissions officer, where, you know, it would be like, you know, with 25 seconds on the clock, the ball was in my hands, right? With 90 seconds on the clock and down by 6 points, we were driving down the field. You know, with 2 laps to go, I was 100 meters behind. You know how those essays end? 98% of the time, the student either wins or they loses. They lose, right? And so even as an admissions officer, you're kind of like, oh, I know where that's going. I know where that's going to go, right? And so really think about, before you dive into talking about sports, that you're not just falling into the cliches. I remember in high school playing soccer in my senior year. I was incredibly excited to play our rival high school, who we had never beaten. And we played them well the whole game. And in the last minute, they scored and they tied us. So we didn't lose, but I was devastated. And I remember locking myself in my bedroom and just being so upset, right? And I remember my dad knocking on the door and kind of saying, Arun, I just want to remind you, it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. And I was just like, what? That is such a lame cliche that didn't make me feel better at all, right? You need to avoid those kind of cliches that sound really deep, but don't mean much of anything. The number 2 point, expanding cultural horizons through travel abroad. Some of you are children of immigrants. You've had the chance to go visit your families in Korea and in Mexico and Honduras, and that's awesome. But if you write your essay about like, I had this opportunity to go to India and it was so different, like people there don't eat hamburgers, they eat rice and, vegetables, and, it's so hot there and people still, no one wears shorts, and you just point out all these differences. Where those essays end up 99% of the time? They end up with, but what I learned is we're all still the same. So it's like, you can do that with Mexico, you can do that with Korea, you can do that with, France, wherever the case might be. Kind of just doing this whole, like, I've learned so much about the world through this one trip, and I've learned we're all still the same. Admissions officers have read it a million times. And if you want me to highlight a little bit, like the University of California UCLA last year, for the freshman class, received 112,000 applications, 112,000 applications. And they have 4 written questions for each of them. They don't call them essays, they call them personal insight questions. So you can do 4 times 112. That's almost 450,000 essays were written for UCLA alone last year. And so keep that in mind. Number 3, the blood drive essay. Kid writes, in 9th grade, I volunteered for the blood drive. It changed my life. I learned how important it is to live every day to the fullest. And then I look at the rest of their application and it's like, this kid never did community service again. Like, why is he writing an essay about the blood drive changing his life? Some of you have absolutely had volunteer experiences that have changed you and impacted you in serious ways. A lot of you, some of you, you've just kind of done it for the hours, right? It probably isn't something you're excited about writing about. And again, would go back to this idea of you're just trying to admit, and I'm starting to get even more good questions. So great. We're going to have a fun Q&A. Keep throwing them in there, students. I appreciate it. And then the 4th one, lessons learned through leadership. And honestly, we could swap out leadership for teamwork or whatever the case. There can sometimes be this idea, like 17, 18-year-old, like, I need to impress them with these lessons that I've learned, right? Again, you're a 17, 18-year-old. You're going to keep learning. There's an adult on the other side who's reading it. They're not really looking for wisdom from a 14-year-old, from a high school student, right? So keep that in mind as to, don't put pressure on yourself. Like, I need to sound really wise. No, you're a 17, 18-year-old. You can be excited about the world and not knowing what's in front of you. That would be perfectly wise, as opposed to like, I've seen the world, I've experienced it all. They might instead kind of go, well, then do you even need college if you've already like figured everything out? So keep that in mind as you think about something where you're like, I'm going to share all these important lessons that I've learned at such a young age. So I want to kind of take some time now, and we're going to talk about the supplemental essays, because I know not all of you are applying to schools where you're going to be just writing that personal statement. Some of you are going to be applying to schools that also have these shorter essay questions. And I'm going to share some examples of that. But before I do, I want to tackle a few of the questions that have come in here. There was a question here about, should you write about a hardship or loss of someone and how it impacted your high school years? If that is a story that is important to you and is about you fundamentally, absolutely, that can be an essay that you write about. Writing about a hardship, loss of someone, especially if it impacted you. Where it doesn't work is essays like this would pop up where, in 7th grade, my parents divorced and it was really difficult. And they spent all their time talking about 7th grade and how their grades slipped, blah, blah, blah. And then never tell me about what it's like to now be, 6, 7 years later, how their life might be different. Right? Or you'll have students, and I swear, a UCLA admissions officer who I spoke with on a panel once said this. He read an essay about a student who talked about in 6th grade, her pet rabbit drowned in the pool, which is obviously super sad and depressing. But she wrote her entire essay about that. In 6th grade, her rabbit died, and she learned from that day to live every day to the fullest. And it was kind of like between 6th grade and 12th grade, nothing more interesting happened to you? Like that's what you've been fixated on was your rabbit six years ago. And then you have the cliche of living every day to the fullest. That's where, yes, that was a loss of something. That was hardship, but that felt like, again, you're not being honest and authentic. So yes, if you've got something to say about the loss of someone and it reveals things about you, if it's only revealing things about how amazing that person was or how awful that person was, that won't make sense. But if you talk about how it impacts your years, then absolutely, it's a wonderful essay to write. There's another question, here about what, as a college counselor, what types of essays made me choose a student with a lower GPA among academically strong applicants? Well, listen, I couldn't take at the schools I worked at, a school like UCLA that's so selective, same thing with Chicago and Caltech. I couldn't take a student who was academically unqualified, right? A student who kind of simply showed they're not getting work done, they're not preparing for tests, things like that. But there were students who had lower test scores, lower GPAs, maybe didn't take as tough of classes for some reason. And I would admit them over students who had perfect grades, perfect test scores. And that the reason I could do that was it comes back to that idea of curiosity and passion. If a kid showed me, all right, listen, I am not a natural at physics. I'm not a natural at poetry, but oh my God, I love it. I will put in the work. I will work hard. And if that shows up in their essays, if that shows up in the letters of recommendation, the activities they've been involved with, that's passion, that's curiosity. And I'm going to take that kid over a kid who's naturally a physics genius or a poetry genius, but who doesn't work that hard and isn't willing to kind of put in the effort. I'll take the kid who works hard and is excited and is pumped about things. I'm going to take one more here, and I'm going to keep kind of going through stuff. And let's see. Gosh, there's so many. There's an essay question here about, should you write about things that make you more vulnerable? Absolutely. If you can honestly write about being vulnerable in a way that it is true, and it's not just trying to make the admissions officer pity you with tears, go for it, right? But I can also tell you as an admissions officer, an adult, even when I was 22 years old, as an admissions officer at my alma mater, I could tell who was trying to trick me, who was trying to create a little bit of a tear jerker and hope that I felt a little bit sorry for them. Because sometimes on these essays, you can't fake it till you make it, right? Which is why, again, I keep using words like honest and authenticity. If you truly are being vulnerable and I want to share this with you, absolutely, you should do it. I should also, one note I should add though, when you share vulnerability, make it clear to the admissions officer that you are working on countering that vulnerability. It is great to be vulnerable. That is like someone with deep emotional strength, but you also need to be clear, it's not dragging you into pits of despair, right? That it's actually launching you into greater things, that it's pushing you into it's pushing you forward, right? So if you're talking about being vulnerable, make it clear that you've got strengths that are going to come through and that the admissions office will value you with as well. And again, I'm not going to ignore your other questions. I'll keep coming back to them, but I want to talk a little bit about this idea of fit with these supplemental essays that are incredibly important. Colleges, I mentioned UCLA, 112,000 applications. Even a school like Caltech in Chicago, they're admitting 10% or fewer of the students now. I think both of them are down to 8% or something like that. So they have many more students they can admit and who are qualified than they've got spots for in their dorms, in the in the dining halls, in the classrooms, on the athletic fields, everything. So it's really important that you make it clear to the college that you are a good fit for the school, that you are someone who would make an impact on their campus. And so I pulled out a handful of essays here, supplemental essays, where it talks about some of the things these colleges value. And it also talks about what they're looking for in the kinds of student they're going to admit. And if you kind of look at these questions and you're like, I don't know what the heck they're asking for, then you probably aren't a good fit. You need to consider, does that school make sense for me? So for example, I've got in the upper left, Harvard, which really is looking for citizens, people who are going to be engaged with their communities, who want to be leaders in their community. If you're a student who's like, honestly, I've got 3 friends. We love to spend time on Discord playing video games, chatting that way. We do a little bit of programming. I mostly am looking forward to going to college and continuing to like hang out in my dorm. You might not be the best, fit for a school like Harvard that's looking for someone to be a citizen, part of something larger. Cornell, if you're a kid, one of the great engineering schools of the world, and you're like, I think I want to be an engineer because I heard they make a lot of money. Well, Cornell is actually asking you, how are you going to take your education to solve problems to make the world a better place? And if you're kind of like, well, I don't care about that, I want to make money. Nothing wrong with wanting to make money, but there'll be a different engineering school that is a better fit for you, not Cornell. Cornell is going to be looking for, yes, you're really good at math and science. You could be an engineer. You could be successful here, but we want you to use your skill set to improve the world we live in. Dartmouth, the one at the bottom, has an essay, Childish Gambino there. The thing I imagine myself being in the future doesn't exist yet. So they are looking for students who aren't coming in like, I want to be a doctor, 100%. I want to be a lawyer, 100%. Again, incredible goals. I hope all of you are have great visions for yourself and are dreaming big. But Dartmouth also likes the idea of the kid who's not 100% sure, right? Who wants to be able to kind of come to Dartmouth and explore and find the best version of themselves. And so they built their essays around that. So it's really important. All these things that I talked about earlier about not being generic, not trying to impress them, this honesty, this authenticity is going to be really important to weave in, even in these supplemental essays. So here's an example of 2 schools. Barnard is a women's college in New York affiliated with Columbia University. And then you've got USC, Allison's alma mater. And they're asking, why do you want to go to these schools? And so I'm going to encourage all of you, going back to that, don't try to fake it till you make it. If you want to go to USC, if you want to go to Barnard, make sure you want to go there for the right reasons. It's not enough to say like, oh, Allison Felix went there, or my favorite teacher went there, or 3 generations of my family have gone to USC. It's important for you to do the research about the school to know why it fits for you, right? It's great that it worked out for all of them. Why does it work for you? I'm friendly with the director of admissions there at USC, and he tells this story about how he'll get essays where kids will talk about, when I was 2 years old, my grandfather gave me a USC blanket and I've slept on it every night since. Well, okay, but the question is asking you, describe your academic interests and how you plan to pursue them at USC. What is your grandfather and what does a blanket and you sleeping with it every night have to do with your academic interests? Because you know what, other kids who have done the hard work and the research to know why they're applying to USC, they're writing essays like, well, you have an amazing environmental science program. I'm going to minor in your amazing Spanish program. I'm going to use both of those and do a study abroad program in Costa Rica. And that puts me one step closer to being a dolphin trainer in the Bahamas when I graduate, right? That's a kid who's painting a picture of, here's what I want to do when I'm on that campus. So make sure with these supplemental essays, you have done the research, you've done the hard work to understand what these schools are about and why you connect yourself to those things. Here's a few examples. I'll give you guys a second. St. Mary's is a wonderful Catholic college up in Northern California. So this reminds you a little bit of Alex. Like technically, this is all correct. So here's a typical response. Here's a better response. Take a couple seconds to read through it. I'm gonna have a sip of tea while you're reading. Again, lots of detail connecting it to herself. Here's another example here of technically, well, it's all correct here. And then read this one. Reed College, by the way, is this wonderful small liberal arts college. If any of you out there you love reading, you love ideas and talking about philosophy and politics and humanities, this is an unbelievable school. Reed up in Portland. You have lots of money and give out lots of good scholarships too. So this kid talks about, like, speaking of bacteria, not every kid's honestly gets excited about it, it is clear that this is the kind of kid who gets excited about it, and he has connected himself to read. He was admitted to read, right? Because he made it clear, versus this kid, okay, it's fine. But I didn't really get a sense that you like love us. This kid, you're kind of like, I want to be with kids who think bacteria jokes are funny, which probably isn't about 90% of us. But if you find bacteria jokes funny, this kid found read to be a good connection for him. So we're going to start diving into some of these Q&A questions, but I want to highlight just a few things. Again, just a reminder, this process doesn't have to be stressful. These essays, if you think about the kinds of things where you're kind of like, I want them to know this about me, you're starting to get to that place of like, this would be an interesting topic. And the other thing I want to kind of point out, which I think tends to stress students out more than anything, is this idea that there's like one perfect topic out there. The reality is if I sat down with any of you for an hour, we'd probably find 6, a dozen great topics that you'd be pumped to talk about. You just have to pick one of them, right? You're not going to get a chance to talk about every single thing you've done in your life. And besides, that's already in your activity section. Your teachers are already talking about that in your letters of recommendation. Awards that you might have won, they're in the awards section. The courses you've taken, they're in your transcript. So you just have to find those 1 or 2 stories out there that you're really excited to share. And that becomes kind of the start of your essay. At the same time, I'm going to encourage you guys, as former admissions officers, you can tell already, I like the essays where kids took some risks and brought some personality out. I'm going to encourage you, take some risks when you do this. Like if you are a funny person, feel free to bring in your jokes. If you are a deep, thoughtful person who thinks about the world in a particular way, let that side of your personality come out. I think the students who kind of play it safe and try to just run through the middle of just like, I'm going to just, meet the minimum standards and just be kind of basic going through it, that's fine. They're absolutely going to go to college, but it's not the kind of thing that makes an admissions officer go, I'm going to go to committee and I'm going to fight for that kid. I want to make sure that kid wins one of our scholarships, right? I think the kids who get out there and really let their personality out and are vulnerable and are honest and are showing vision of who they want to become, really pretty awesome things happen. And finally, I love the essays that showed a little bit of swagger. And keep in mind, swagger is different than cocky, right? Cocky is kind of just like, I'm not really sure you can back it up. But we've got 2 people here on screen who they've got swagger, right? They can back up any of the boasts that they make. I loved those kids who wrote essays that weren't, the kid who was writing about, like, I've slept on that USC blanket since I was 2 years old. Fight Trojan, fight on. That's a kid who sounds desperate. Like there's claw marks, please let me in, USC. Then there's that other kid I talked about. That kid has a bit of swagger. As a university, you're like, I want the kid who's not desperate. I like the kid who's got some confidence that if we don't admit him at USC or UCLA or Cal or Duke or Northwestern, some other school is going to snatch him up. So let's make sure we get him to our campus, right? So I encourage all of you, listen to these experts that are coming through here in the next few weeks, and good things are going to happen. Like all of you have stories to share. You have things that admissions officers are going to find valuable. So I'm going to dive into the Q&A. One of the things that I want to mention, if you go to the CollegeWise website, which is pretty easy, collegewise.com, we have this entire course built out for seniors. Every step of the admissions process set up as 3 to 7 minute videos. There's a whole chunk more on essays. And if you are younger students, there's actually a whole course built out for freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. There are podcasts. Podcasts are me. I'm the host of that show. There are videos, there are guides, all sorts of tools and resources. I saw a few questions about like, how do I get brainstorming? There's an entire section on that. So sign up for Runway. It's totally free. You should take advantage of it. We love putting tons of stuff out there. We have within that, a whole guide to completing the Common Application. It is 70 pages on just how to complete the Common App Guide, down to crazy details like which phone number should you put into your application, right? And there's a whole thing about how to pick your essay topics and things of that sort as well. And they're in nice bite-sized digestible form. So definitely hop on there and spend some time looking through it. And with that, I'm going to kind of dive into some of the Q&A here, because you guys have been crushing it with these questions. Yes, the PowerPoint will be sent to all of you. I'm going to make sure you're actually going to get a copy of the recording because it's going to be uploaded to YouTube. And then you'll also have the PowerPoint that you can play with as well. So let's see. Let me dive back. Great question here about, can essays be over-focused on your identity? Here's the truth. If you're a student who your identity, and we can define identity in a multitude of ways, right? For some of you, your identity is like, I'm first generation. I'm super proud of the fact that I'm going to be the first in my family go to college. Some of you, your identity is, I'm the only person who's gay and out within my family, within my church. Some of you are Latino living in entirely white communities, right? And you feel very like, yeah, I'm definitely Hispanic and I want to be able to talk about that. Yes, that's you being open and honest and authentic. So I don't think there's any such thing as this idea of being over-focused on your identity, as long as, again, you're doing it in an honest and authentic way. And you're not doing it, again, just try to like, well, I hope the admissions officer feels sorry for me or something like that, right? I'm not suggesting that's why you might over-focus on it, but it does end up being something that can be powerful in the story. But I'm also going to note that you don't have to talk about that either, right? Like I've had students who, listen, my brother was killed in a gang-related incident last summer, and everyone keeps telling me that I need to write my essay about it. But I got to be honest with you, that happened to my brother, it happened to my family. But the most important thing to me was this camp that I did this summer where I learned chess, and I am obsessed with chess and I want to talk about it. Cool. Write about chess. Right? Your teacher will probably write about that. One of your counselors will write about that stuff. So you'll trust yourselves in this process. Think less about what would the admissions officers want. Think about, I need to share this story. I worked with a student 2 years ago who, if you met her in public, you would just think she's the happiest, cheeriest girl who had just lived a perfect life. Just kind of like, God, nothing bad has happened to her. But the reality was, at home, it was a pretty dark and grim story, right? And she was like, well, I don't want my teachers to find out that this is my home life situation. And after we had a conversation, she realized, okay, my teachers aren't going to find this out. She was like, I need colleges need to know this. This is important. I'm so proud of what I've been able to accomplish, despite what no one else, the rest of the world, sees me as this perfect, white girl in the suburbs. And I need them to know, here's what's going on at home. That was her story. That was part of her identity. So, sorry, I'm going to go through the questions for a couple more minutes here. Give me a second. And, there is a question here about, I think I maybe accidentally forwarded it. Can these essays be used for scholarships or just for school acceptance? Something I'm always reminding our students: recycle, reuse, recycle, reuse. As you think about your personal statement, and your personal statement, that's the essay that's going to go to any of your common application schools, whether it is, the University of Michigan, whether it's Ohio State, whether it is USC. Now, I will note the University of California, they have their own application, and they've got they give you 8 prompts and you choose 4 of them. So it's a little bit different. You're not writing a 650 word essay for them, but you can definitely take that 650 word one, make it shorter, and have it respond to one of those UC prompts. You are definitely not in a world where, if you've got 8, 10, 12 schools on your list, where you're writing a brand new personal statement for each one. You're absolutely going to be using these over and over. So understand there's nothing wrong with that. And if you're using them in the admissions process, absolutely you can use them for scholarship processes. Now, it is worth noting that, let's say you apply to Boston University, you'll be submitting your personal statement, but there's also another 650 word essay for the scholarship, and it's going to be read by the same people. There it will say, don't reuse your Common App, your personal statement, write us a fresh one, and it'll have fresh prompts. So I'm always reminding students, like, you have to read the directions. So make sure that you take some time to respond, to read those directions so that you know that you're, doing things appropriately. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to take two more and then we will. Could you touch briefly on which topics would be great to write about in our college essay? And that's something I want to highlight. There is no great essay topic. There is no, universally speaking, there's no great, what works for you might not work for your best friend. It might not work for your cousin. It might, but it might not as well. And so again, this is where you have to give yourself time to like step back, pause, and think about yourself. Like, you should have some time to reflect and kind of go, I want them to know this about me. And here's a story that will share that. And for some of you, it's going to be just like, I love philosophy. Some of you, it's going to be like, I will do anything to play more baseball and learn more about baseball. And I need to share that. That is my passion. That I stay up reading Major League Baseball rules and how the collective bargaining agreement works between the players and the union and the league. Great. There is no great essay topic out there. And the reality is there's nothing unique out there. Remember, I talked about UCLA is going to see about 450,000 essays. Within that, almost every topic is going to be covered. Short of you becoming like the next person on the moon or first person to Mars, there's no truly unique topic out there, which is why you have to bring in those descriptive details and things of that sort. Okay, let me take one last essay question. Also, there is an essay question that's like, what if you're bad at self-reflection? I'll be honest, it's going to be trickier. Yeah, those are the essays that end up being kind of flat and just kind of like, you've got to at least have some sense of why are you going to college. If you have a sense of why you're going to college that is beyond, well, I'm 18, I have to go to college because I'm not joining the military. If you have a sense of why you want to go to college, that already is some level of reflection. And that should be a starting off point. It's worth noting, I mentioned Runway. There's a number of like videos there to get you kickstarted, but the internet also has lots of prompts out there. And I will also say the University of California, even if you're not applying to the UCs, which I hope all of you do because it's such a, affordable option in a lot of ways. At least those of you who are in California. They have a lot of great resources as well. There are lots of great questions. The College Board, the people who administer the Common App, they also have a lot of like prompts that will get you kind of to sit back. But here's the reality. You're a teenager who wants to go to college. You showed up with your free time. You absolutely are capable of self-reflection. Someone mentioned vulnerability earlier. It does mean being able to like sit back and give yourself time. Don't focus on, I need to get into this college. Just think about, here are things that I want to share. And then finally, there's a question about in here, how do you, and I'll make this the final prompt here, how do you be honest in your essay without being unprofessional? And I'm guessing not necessarily unprofessional, but inappropriate is the word that I would use here. And, that can be a funny thing because I'll have students who are like, can I use a curse word? And I'll kind of be like, you want to use a curse word in your college essay? Tell me a little bit more about why. And sometimes I'm like, yes, absolutely. Other times I'm like, no, it seems like you're just trying to like get a bad word in there. Anything can be appropriate. Admissions officers are reading these stories of lives that are being lived in real ways, right? So they are trained, and the expectation is you're going to read some stories that are really hard. There were essays I would read with a lump in my throat. I still remember a student earlier, someone had asked, what's an example of a student that you might take with lower grades, lower test scores? I remember reading the story at the University of Chicago of a young, this young woman who was an unbelievable writer and just a fantastic writer, but her grades were a little bit lower than most students at her school. Her test scores were a little bit lower. Her letter of recommendation talked about the fact that she was homeless. She lived in a station wagon with her mom, and that she wrote eventually when I got to her essays, she wrote her essay. She did everything by the light of the dome light in the middle of her station wagon. So this student who was getting A minuses, B pluses, this young girl, she was doing all while working out of her station wagon. That became very easy to go, we want her and we're going to give her a scholarship, because when she doesn't have to do this work under a single bulb in a station wagon, imagine what she's going to do. I remember another young student from here in Southern California who was a leader at his school. And one of the teachers kind of mentioned the fact that he was a leader in the school, but what was really striking was he had acne so bad that he was almost disfigured by the acne, but he had such a positive, upbeat attitude that it was hard for kids not to just love him. And she was just like, he inspires me, right? So as an admissions officer, you're just kind of like, whoa, right? And so those are things where you might kind of be like, is that something I should be that honest about? Like the fact that I'm homeless or that I have really severe acne? Yeah, that's appropriate. And even a bad word, that could be something that you could share. So I'm going to I've used those words, honesty, authenticity, over and over, that don't impress admissions officers. If you kind of stick to those things as your mantra, things are going to end up going really well. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of pause this right here. And I'm going to kind of encourage you, if you don't remember, to go to the website and check out Runway. You're probably on one of these social networks. If you follow us there, it'll point you back. We have free workshops on a multitude of the topics. If some of you are still figuring out how you're going to pay for college, if some of you are figuring out, how do I build my college list? Some of you are like, we're in a pandemic. How do I go learn about these schools if I can't go physically visit them? We've got resources that explain how to do all those things. So I hope you kind of sign up, tap into those. Otherwise, I'm going to say, I want to thank you for being such an engaged, attentive group. You threw out a lot of questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to every single one of them, but I think I covered almost all of them in some way, shape, or form. And again, if you're interested in getting more kind of feedback, hop onto some of those webinars that we have, and you'll have an opportunity to ask one of my colleagues these exact same questions. So with that, I'm going to return your Saturday mornings to all of, actually, I'm going to pause right now because I just realized I've got one more quick video from Allison and Namdi that you want to be able to watch, and we will be good to go. Hold on a quick second here. Okay, give me a quick moment here, y'all. All right, hopefully you can see this, and I'm going to go ahead and let them have the last words.
Thank you, Arun, for such an informative talk. And we appreciate all of you joining us today. And we hope you're feeling more confident with the tools to prepare you to write great college essays.
Next weekend, we'll be discussing all things financial. That's financial aid, scholarships, graduating college debt-free, things like that. We'll be sending you a link on Friday. We really hope that you guys can join us. The session will again be on Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. We can't wait to see you then. Have a great day.